I never believed in ghosts or the paranormal until I became a sky marshal. For those who don't know, we are the air marshals who protect passengers on flights. I have always been a skeptic, but something happened during one of my flights that changed my perspective forever. It started off as a routine flight from New York to Los Angeles. My partner and I were patrolling the cabin when I felt a cold breeze brush past me. I didn't think much of it at first, but then I saw something out of the corner of my eye. A woman in a white dress was sitting in one of the seats, staring straight ahead. I turned to my partner to point it out, but when I looked back, she was gone. I thought I was imagining things until my partner mentioned feeling the same cold breeze. We decided to investigate, but nothing seemed out of place. That was until we found a passenger manifest from a flight that had crashed in the same spot we were flying over. It was the same flight, down to the passenger in the white dress. We tried to shrug it off, but the rest of the flight was plagued with strange occurrences. Doors opening and closing by themselves, equipment malfunctioning, and whispers in our ears. It wasn't until we landed that I felt relieved. But as we were walking through the terminal, I heard a voice whisper in my ear, "Thank you for watching over us." I turned around, but no one was there. Since then, I've heard stories from other sky marshals who have had similar experiences. We never talk about it with anyone outside of the force for fear of being labeled crazy, but we all know that something otherworldly is happening in the skies. As for me, I'm no longer a skeptic. I know what I saw, and I'll never forget the haunting of the sky marshals. It's hard to describe the feeling of fear mixed with fascination that I felt during that flight. I had always thought that the idea of ghosts and the paranormal was something made up to scare people. But that experience made me question everything I had ever believed. The cold breeze that passed by me was so real that I could feel the hairs on my arms stand up. And the image of the woman in the white dress is forever etched in my memory. It's almost as if she was a real passenger on our flight. After that flight, I had trouble sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the woman in the white dress staring at me, and the whispers in my ear made me jump at every little sound. But as time went by, I began to accept that what I experienced was real, and I found comfort in the fact that I wasn't alone. Other sky marshals had similar experiences, and we were all in this together. Now, every time I board a flight, I'm always on the lookout for anything out of the ordinary. And while I hope that I never experience anything like that again, a part of me is intrigued by the idea of the paranormal. The haunting of the sky marshals will forever be a part of my story, and I'm grateful for the experience. It taught me to keep an open mind and to always be aware of my surroundings. Who knows what otherworldly experiences might be waiting for me in the future? As I started to explore the idea of the paranormal, I found myself delving deeper into stories and myths surrounding ghosts and spirits. I spoke to other people who had experienced unexplained phenomena and learned about the different types of hauntings that exist. One thing that struck me was the idea of residual energy. According to paranormal experts, it's possible for the energy of a person or event. My name is Tom, and I have been a sky marshal for over a decade. It's a job that I love, and I take great pride in keeping passengers safe in the skies. But one flight, in particular, will always stay with me. It was the flight that I recognized one of the passengers as being dead in his seat. We were flying from New York to London, and it was a relatively quiet flight. My partner and I were patrolling the cabin when I noticed something strange. A man in his mid-40s was sitting in his seat, completely still. At first I thought he was sleeping, but when I looked closer, I realized that he wasn't breathing. I called over my partner and we tried to revive him, but it was too late. The man was dead, and there was nothing we could do. We informed the pilot, who immediately diverted the flight to the nearest airport. When we landed, we were met by medical professionals who confirmed that the man had passed away. It was a shock to everyone on the flight, and I couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. As we were escorting the passengers off the plane, I noticed something odd. The man's seat was completely dry. There were no signs of sweat or bodily fluids, even though the man had been dead for hours. It was then that I started to believe that something paranormal was at play. I had heard stories from other sky marshals about strange occurrences happening on flights, but I had never experienced anything like this before. The rest of the flight was a blur, and I couldn't wait to get off the plane, but as I was leaving, I heard a voice whisper in my ear, "Thank you for trying." I turned around, but there was no one there. That experience stayed with me for weeks, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. I tried to rationalize it, but nothing made sense. It wasn't until I spoke to some of my colleagues that I realized that I wasn't alone in my experience. Apparently, there have been other cases of passengers passing away on flights, only to be found later with no apparent cause of death. It's as if something supernatural was at play, and we were just witnessing the aftermath. Since that flight, I've started to look into the paranormal more. I've read books and spoken to experts in the field, trying to understand what happened that day. But even now, I still can't explain it. Being a sky marshal is a tough job, and we see a lot of things that most people never will. But that experience has taught me to keep an open mind and to always be aware of my surroundings. Who knows what otherworldly experiences might be waiting for me in the future? The haunting of the skies is something that can't be explained rationally. As a sky marshal, I have seen my fair share of strange occurrences, but nothing quite like recognizing a dead passenger in his chair. It's an experience that I will never forget, and it has opened my mind to the possibility of the paranormal. I'm a sky marshal, and I've been in the aviation industry for over 2 decades. I've encountered many strange and unexpected events during my time in the skies, but one incident stands out in particular. It was a paranormal experience that happened to me and the pilot on a flight from Chicago to Paris. The flight had been uneventful, and we were cruising at 35,000 feet when suddenly the cockpit door burst open. I was sitting in the back and I heard the pilot shout out in surprise. I rushed to the front to see what was going on. As I entered the cockpit, I saw the pilot looking terrified. His eyes were wide open and he was sweating profusely. When I asked him what was wrong, he didn't answer. He just pointed to the window in front of him. I looked outside and saw what he was pointing at. There was a strange figure hovering outside the plane, almost like a shadow. It had no discernible shape or form, but it was unmistakably there. I had heard stories about pilots encountering strange sightings in the sky, but I had never witnessed anything like this before. We were both frozen, unable to move or speak. It felt like time had stopped, and we were in some sort of trance. Suddenly, the figure started moving closer to the plane, and I could hear a strange, low-pitched humming sound. It was like nothing I had ever heard before, and it was incredibly unsettling. As the figure moved closer, the pilot regained his senses and quickly closed the cockpit door. We both sat there in silence, waiting for something else to happen, but nothing did. The humming sound eventually faded away and the figure disappeared from view. We landed safely in Paris, and the rest of the flight was uneventful, but the incident stayed with us both for a long time. We didn't speak about it to anyone, afraid of being labeled as crazy or losing our jobs. It wasn't until a few years later that I finally opened up about the experience. I spoke to other pilots and aviation experts, hoping to find an explanation for what had happened that day, but no one had any answers. To this day, I'm still not sure what we saw or heard that day, but one thing's for sure, it was a paranormal experience that I will never forget. It made me realize that there are still many mysteries in the world that we may never understand. As a sky marshal, I've seen my fair share of strange events and incidents, but this one stands out as the most bizarre and unexplainable. It taught me to keep an open mind and to always be aware of my surroundings. Who knows what else is out there in the vast expanse of the sky? Years passed, and the memory of that incident slowly faded away. I had other experiences to deal with, other incidents to investigate, and other flights to monitor. But deep down, I knew that the encounter with the mysterious figure outside the plane was still a part of me. One day, as I was flying back home from a trip, I decided to open up about the incident to my wife. She was surprised and fascinated by my story, and she listened intently as I recounted every detail. As I finished telling her about the strange figure outside the plane, I noticed something odd happening outside the window. It was a bright light that seemed to be following our plane, moving in a strange pattern that defied explanation. I pointed it out to my wife, and she gasped in surprise. The light continued to move in erratic patterns, sometimes darting across the sky, sometimes hovering in one spot. It was unlike anything either of us had ever seen before. I knew that I had to investigate this further. I couldn't just ignore this strange light. As a sky marshal, it was my duty to investigate any potential threats to the safety of the flight. I called the pilot and asked him to divert the course slightly to get a closer look. As we moved closer to the light, I felt a sense of excitement and fear. I had no idea what we were about to encounter, but I knew that it was going to be unlike anything I had ever experienced before. As we got closer, I could see that the light was emanating from a strange object hovering in the sky. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before, and I struggled to describe it to the pilot. It was a metallic object with a strange curved shape. It seemed to be pulsing with energy, emitting a bright light that filled the sky around us. I had never seen anything like it, and I felt a sense of awe and wonder mixed with fear and apprehension. Suddenly, the object started moving towards us, and I could feel the plane shake as it got closer. The pilot was trying to maintain control of the plane, but it was clear that this object was affecting the plane's systems. As the object got closer, I could see that there were strange symbols etched onto its surface. They were unlike any language I had ever seen before, and I couldn't make any sense of them. The object continued to move closer, and I could feel a strange sensation in my body. It was like a buzzing feeling, almost like an electric shock. I was scared but also fascinated by what was happening, and then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the object disappeared. The buzzing feeling in my body faded away, and I could feel the plane returning to normal. We landed safely a few hours later, but the memory of that encounter stayed with me for a long time. I tried to investigate the incident, but there was no evidence of any strange objects in the area. It was like the whole thing had been a figment of our imagination, but I knew what I had seen, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something out there that we didn't understand. Years passed, and I continued to work as a sky marshal, encountering all sorts of strange and unexpected events. But that encounter with the mysterious object in the sky stayed with me, a reminder that there is still so much that we don't understand about the world around us. As I look back on my years as a sky marshal, I realize that I've been lucky to witness so many incredible things. I've seen the beauty of the world from a unique perspective, but I've also seen the darkness that lurks beneath the surface. And yet, despite all of the strange and terrifying things I've seen, I still feel a sense of wonder and excitement about the world around me. There is still so much to discover, so much to learn, and so much to explore. As I prepare to retire from my job as a sky marshal, I feel grateful for the experiences that I've had. They have taught me so much about the world and about myself, and who knows, maybe one day I'll encounter another paranormal event that will challenge everything I thought I knew. But until then, I'll continue to look up at the sky with a sense of wonder and awe, knowing that there is still so much out there to discover. I've seen a lot of strange things in my years as a sky marshal, but what I experienced on 2010 on a flight from the United States to Australia will stay with me for the rest of my life. It all started when we were about halfway through the flight. I was walking through the cabin, making sure everything was in order, when I noticed a strange energy in the air. It was like a buzzing feeling, almost like electricity. As I looked around the cabin, I saw that several passengers were staring at a particular seat. I walked over to investigate, and what I saw made my blood run cold. There was a passenger sitting in the seat, but he was completely motionless. It was like he was frozen in time, his eyes fixed on some distant point. I tried to rouse him, but he didn't respond. As I was trying to figure out what was going on, I noticed something strange in the air. It was like a shimmering mist, almost like a heat haze. It was hard to see, but I could tell that it was there. And then, suddenly, the mist coalesced into a shape. It was like a ghostly figure, hovering over the passenger in the seat. I was shocked, but also fascinated. I had never seen anything like it before. I watched in amazement as the figure started to move towards me. It was like it was trying to communicate with me, but I couldn't understand what it was saying. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. The passenger in the seat started moving again, like nothing had ever happened. I was shaken by the experience, but I knew that I had to report it to the pilot. I told him everything that had happened, and he was understandably skeptical. But then, something strange happened. One of the other passengers overheard our conversation, and he spoke up. He told us that he had seen something similar on a flight a few years ago. He said that he had seen strange misty shapes, and that he had felt a sense of dread. I was surprised to hear this, but also relieved. It meant that I wasn't alone in what I had experienced. And then the passenger dropped a bombshell. He told us that he had been doing some research, and that he believed that the misty shapes were the spirits of people who had died on previous flights. I was shocked by this revelation, but I couldn't deny the feeling of unease that I had felt on that flight. It was like there was something dark and mysterious lurking just out of sight. As we continued our journey to Australia, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I kept my eyes open, looking for any signs of the misty shapes or the ghostly figures. But we arrived in Australia without incident, and the rest of the trip was uneventful. I didn't tell anyone else about what I had seen, but it stayed with me for a long time. Looking back on that experience, I still can't explain what I saw. But I know that it was real, and that there are forces in this world that we can't fully understand or explain. As I continue my work as a sky marshal, I know that I will encounter many more strange and unexpected events, but that experience will always stand out as one of the most memorable and unsettling of my career.